So I've gotten a few requests for the recipe for my cinnamon pinwheel scones, sweet scones. Um, so I'm going to try something new and make a video of me making them. When I was growing up, these were an extra special treat that my mother would make for us with either these or sweet scones with just a drizzle of corn syrup and fresh butter hot out of the oven. To me, that is the taste of love. So I'm going to try share that with you today. First of all, I start with just all-purpose flour, white sugar, baking powder, shortening, salt, and warm water. To start with, I use 3 scoops or so, so roughly probably 3.5 to 4 cups of flour. To the flour, I add a handful, palmful, probably about a tablespoonful of salt and a shake of baking powder. Once I've mixed it all together so that it's well mixed, using the other hand, I take a little tiny bit on my finger and taste it to see whether or not I have the right amount of baking powder. I don't, so I'm going to add a little bit more. And I'll mix that in and continue tasting as I go. When I've got the mix right, the flour has a fizzy taste on the tip of your tongue, and I can also taste just a tiny bit of salt. Still not quite there. I'm guessing that that's roughly about 2 tablespoons of baking powder I end up using. It varies because the amount of flour I use varies. Okay, that's right. So now that I've got my flour mixed up, I wash the hand that I tasted with. Each time I taste, I use a different finger so I'm not making my food all disgusting for everyone else who is going to eat it. With my clean, dry hand, I then put in 2 generous handfuls of white sugar. And once again, I mix that in with my left hand. Once that's well mixed, I add about 3 big scoops of Crisco, and I mix that with my fingers. And I just keep mashing that about until it's all the consistency of fine sand. It takes a good 3 or 4 minutes to do that. I've just realized that while I was mixing the Crisco, I forgot to put in my powdered milk. I like to use about 2 handfuls of powdered milk. Normally I would add the powdered milk to all the dry ingredients, but that's okay. It's still well mixed in. As you can see, the texture is like wet sand. A little bit crumbly with some crumb to it. So now it's ready for the water. I add the water as needed. I start with probably about 1.5 cups of very warm water. Not too hot, not boiling. You don't want to start cooking anything yet, but the warm water will help everything to blend nicer. So I start with about 1.5 cups. It starts out really sloppy and goopy. Get my hand in there. You don't want to work the dough too much because it'll make for a tough scone. Okay. Add just a little more water down in here where it's still pretty dry. You don't want your dough to be too wet, so that it's sticking to everything, but you definitely don't want it too thick and dry either. I'm going to add a little more water. You can see that it's still a little dry in there. So at this point, if I was making just a regular sweet scone, maybe a raisin bun, I would add my raisins to it and just drop it by the handful onto my cookie sheet and bake it. But because I'm going to do my cinnamon pinwheels, I'm just going to turn that all out onto the counter. Make some room for myself. And I'm just going to loosely form it into a rectangle that's about roughly 1/2 inch to 1 inch thick. Now sometimes I'll spread this with some margarine or butter. Butter is best if I have it. Sometimes I just don't bother with either. So from here, I take a couple handfuls of brown sugar and just sprinkle it over top. Making it fairly even. Take my cinnamon and give it a dusting. And I cut that down the center so that now I have 2 long narrow rectangles. Working from the center out to the edges, I carefully roll it. And I do the same thing to the other side. So then I take each of these logs and I cut them into roughly 12 pieces each. And bake them at I baked them at 325 in my convection oven for about 20 minutes. And there we go. We have 2 pans of sweet cinnamon pinwheel scones ready to go in the oven. I'm sure I could have made them look prettier, but I'm showing you how I cook for real for me and my family, and this is it. Pretty rustic and simple, but so delicious. So now I'll pop these into the oven, and in roughly 20 minutes we will have a delicious treat. Okay, and here we go, fresh hot out of the oven. The sugar has all gone crispy and yummy. They're just golden brown. The bottoms are a little bit deeper brown. But they're just starting to brown. You don't want to go too much longer than that or the bottoms burn and they become dry. And there we go. I hope you try to make these and I hope you enjoy them.